My name is Walter Davis.
Some of you out there may know me, as except for college and
I
military
spent my
service.
entire 82 years in Stanley County.
At an early age, I became fond of reading. It started with comic books and transferred to novels about horses and dogs. Later, it became mystery novels. In 1985, I married Mary Ann Bungardner. She was a history teacher that was studying for her PhD. I retired from Alcoa and spent a lot of time with her in libraries as she searched for information to complete her thesis. When she received her doctorate, I jokingly told her that 1/4 of that doctorate belonged to me.
The time I spent with her in those libraries changed a portion of my reading habit. I became fond of African American history and historical fiction. It was while reading some of the history of the Civil War that I discovered the Rosenwald schools. That is what I'm here to discuss tonight. The school I attended in Norwood from the first grade until the ninth grade in 1953 was a replacement school for a Rosenwald school built in 1917. Stanley County had 6 Rosenwald schools, one in Norwood, Cottonville, New London, Oakboro, Kingville, and Porter. In 1936, these schools were replaced by 2 brick buildings, one in Norwood and one in Albemarle, Kingville. Only one of the original Rosenwald school buildings remain in the county. The building can be seen in New London on Highway 52 across from Parker's Grove Baptist Church. At the end of the Civil War, most freed slaves could neither read nor write. Most slave owners believed that educated slaves were a threat to the institution. North Carolina had an anti-literacy law that made teaching any black person, enslaved or free, to read or write a crime. But in 1862, Vincent Collier, an Army chaplain put in charge of freed slaves on the coast of North Carolina by General Ambrose Burnside, determined that slaves needed education if they were to live as freemen. The Union Army ran several grade schools to teach freed African Americans throughout the South. At the end of the war, schools to teach black children sprang up in several places. During the Reconstruction era, blacks saw education as an important step to gaining equality. As a result, they found ways and places to learn despite obstacles from whites. Some of the places were in homes, churches, in sheds, and even under trees during breaks from their labors. In the late 1890s and early 1900s, blacks attempted to establish their own schools, but tax money, even tax money collected from former slaves, was used to support only white schools. They received little to no monies from the government. Their schools were the result of sometimes gifts from rich white people or money raised from churches and communities. Most of them were shanties with little to no basic supplies. In fact, Booker T. Washington once said they were not fit for pigs. In 1910, Mr. Washington conceived plans to build schools for blacks through public and private partnership. Washington had gained the respect of many white Americans of influence. Among them was President Theodore Roosevelt. He had also obtained financial support from philanthropists Goldman Sachs, Andrew Carnegie, George Eastman, and Henry Huddleston Rogers. He was introduced to Julius Rosenwald, the CEO of Sears, Roebuck and Company, in 1911 by Goldman Sachs. In 1912, Washington asked Rosenwald to sit on the board of Tuskegee Institute, a school established by Washington in Alabama. Washington urged, and Rosenwald provided funds for the construction of 6 small schools in rural Alabama that opened in 1913 and 1914. The schools were overseen by the Tuskegee Institute. Julius Rosenwald was born August 12, 1862, in Springfield, Illinois. He was the son of a Jewish German immigrant. Julius never finished high school, but despite that, education was especially important to him, and he became the president of Sears, Roebuck and Company in 1909. Goldman Sachs was a friend of Julius, and they often talked about the plight of black Americans in the South. In 1917, Rosenwald and his family established the Rosenwald Fund. It donated more than $70 million, equivalent to more than $700 million today, according to one source. The donations were to public schools, colleges, universities, and Jewish charities. Rosenwald offered grants to rural communities that wanted to build these schools, but he asked the communities to match the grants in order to encourage working together to build the schools. To qualify for a grant from the Rosenwald Foundation, the community had to secure funds from the local school board plus donations from the community. Although the money was hard to come by black communities, they raised and contributed nearly $5 million to the construction of 5,338 schools throughout the South. Some community members contributed materials and labor as their match. Some communities held fish fries and bake sales. Rosenwald schools were built in 11 states in the Confederacy, plus Oklahoma, Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland. The Rosenwald School Building Program told the communities how to build the schools. It sent detailed building plans out with the matching grants. The Rosenwald program also dictated paint colors for the buildings. They knew light paint colors would reflect sunshine in the classroom. Because most Rosenwald schools were built in rural locations, very few had electricity. Finally, there were no inside restrooms in Rosenwald schools. The fund instructed communities to build outdoor water wells and privy outhouses. The foundation also gave grants to homes for teachers. There were more Rosenwald schools built in North Carolina than any other state, a total of 813. The schools often consisted of 2 or 3 rooms and were modest and plain so whites would not become angry if the schools appeared to be nicer than their school. That kept them from being destroyed. Most schools had one side facing the sun and consisted mostly of windows to take advantage of the natural light because the buildings had no electric power. The communities could also ask for a grant to build homes for black teachers. Only black teachers could teach at Rosenwald schools because of segregation. African American teachers were paid more to teach at Rosenwald schools than other schools for black students. The fund also provided a collection of new books to each school that applied. For the library benign, the fund offered buses for transportation. This was necessary because local school boards often refused to give new schools funding for a bus. By 1928, 1/3 of the South's rural black school children and teachers were served by Rosenwald schools. The Rosenwald School Building Program had widespread impact on black education in the South, and its effects were felt for decades. Many Rosenwald schools closed when the states desegregated public schools in the 1950s and 60s.
Stanley County Board of Education built the 3 new schools during this time. One in the western part of the county, West Stanley High School. One in the northern part of the county, North Stanley High School. And one in the southern part of the county, South Stanley High School, a school attended by my 3 children, Donna, Stephen, and Dawn. In 1932, Julius Rosenwald died, and the fund ceased to exist in 1948.
Girl, hey now that you're sleeping, I've got a confession to make about secrets that I've been keeping. Me and your mama had some problems, a whole lot of things on our minds. But lately, girl, we've been thinking that we were wasting time.